Hi everyone, welcome to day 2 of Perl training on Unix boxes. So yesterday on day 1 we basically discussed about the basics of Perl, how to install Perl, what are the major advantages of Perl, and how is Perl used in the day-to-day operations in major multinational companies. So today we are basically going to start with the basic coding principles of Perl, right? So let's starting with the first point, right? It says create a directory for all your Perl programs. So this basically means just you can create a directory to store all the Perl programs that you're basically creating, right? So let's say, so it's easy for you to navigate. So if you say, I'm going to create a directory XYZ, I'm going to put all my Perl programs in that directory XYZ, it's easy for you to actually know where all your programs are. So here what I mean is, let me show you with a practical example, right? So this is the Linux box and connecting. Yeah. So what I mean is just create a directory, make directory. Sorry, I need to give it a name. Make directory Samson. Right. So I make the directory. I'll change directory to Samson, and all my Perl programs will be under this directory. So let's say any file which I'm going to create will be under the Samson directory. So if you look at my present working directory, it's under /Samson, right? So any Perl program that I'm going to hereby forward going to create, any Perl program that I'm going to create going forward will be under the /Samson directory. For those who are Windows users who don't understand what /Samson directory means on Unix, it's just something like your C drive, right? In Windows, I'm just storing all files under C drive on Windows, but here I'm storing in something called a drive as /Samson. Slash is nothing but something like your C drive. Under that we have a folder called Samson, and under that basically I'm going to store all my Perl programs, right? So let's open now. As I said, right, Perl, how do you type your code in Perl? For Java, for other languages, it has its own integrated development environments like Eclipse, NetBeans, etc. However, for writing the code in Perl for Unix, you have either the VI editor, or I could use the notepad and just copy and paste it here, right? I could use my notepad and then copy and paste it onto my Unix box. However, remember that copying and pasting from a Windows notepad to a Unix VI editor, there are some statements which don't properly get copied. So that is why it is always recommended to use VI editor for typing your code in Unix boxes on Perl, right? So let me repeat that statement. Remember, I am going to, it is always advisable to basically write your programs in VI editor on a Unix box for Perl. However, you could copy some code from a notepad which is on a Windows box, which I will be doing most frequently here, but there will be some characters which will not be copied correctly to a VI editor on a Unix box, right? So anyways, so once I start executing the programs, you will understand that more clearly what exactly I mean over here, right? So starting off, now let's come back. So once we're done creating a directory for all my programs, right, I need to basically, let's say, let me come back to my box, and I'm going to create a file. Now I need to create a file, so I'll call that Perl. It's not necessary Perl, you can write any type, right? I can call it VI Sam, anything, right? So I'm calling it Perl since it's just the naming convention I'm using. You can type it Perl. So I'm basically creating a file called Perl, and all the Perl examples or programs that which I will be showing you going forward will be in this Perl file. It's just a file that I have been creating in VI editor, right? Insert. Now escape word quit. Now if I do the ls command, which is a Unix command, I can see that the file Perl is created, right? Now if you want to read this file Perl, I say cat is a command to basically read a file on Unix. I would say cat Perl. Now if you look at it, it doesn't return any output because I haven't put anything in the file there. Now let's come back to our topic of Perl, right? So here basically what we've done is basically I just created a directory, and under the directory /Samson directory, I created a file called Perl. And remember, the Perl file name can be anything, it can be whatever you type, but here I have typed it Perl because it's just a convention that I've used. It's my comfort. I've used Perl. You can use any other name, right? So Perl is basically a file here. Now the actual process of putting the code and typing the code starts up, right? So as I said, I would be copying from Notepad into VI Editor, but the best practice is to do it directly in VI Editor for Unix boxes, right? Now, coming to the second point, the shebang notation. What does the shebang notation in Perl exactly mean? Now, as you know, on Unix, if you just look at this command, this is basically something like shell, where you're actually trying to find the location of the interpreter, right? So shebang has to always appear at the start of a Perl program. This is where you define where the Perl interpreter is actually located, right? So let me repeat the definition again. So this is basically a shebang notation, and this has to be at the start of every Perl program to show where the location of the Perl interpreter exactly is. However, you could also execute a program without this. Remember, I'm repeating the statement. However, you could also execute a program without this shebang notation. So let me show exactly how that works today, right? So remember here, I'm just using my notepad this is a notepad in Windows to type my code in Perl. So this is the code. I'm just removing this. First, I'm trying to show you how to execute Perl code without the shebang notation, right? Print high. So let's take it an easy code. Print high. So if you look at it, it's just a Perl statement, a print statement, which actually is going to print high. And as I mentioned in my previous class, all the lines between is equal to pod and is equal to cut would be ignored. So ultimately my output should come only as high, right? So I'm just copying this to my file on Unix box. So, and remember, I'm just giving complete permissions to my file. So this is basically, you need to give complete execute permissions to the file on Unix, right? So this command chmod basically gives complete execution permissions to my file on Unix, right? So let me just Perl insert. Now, if you look at it, in this Perl program, if you look at it, it's just a print statement. It does not know where the Perl interpreter is, right? So I don't know. So how would you actually execute the code? So in order for Perl to execute, you need to have the Perl interpreter. But in my code, I have never specified the location of the Perl interpreter here. So what I would do is, I would have to manually call my Perl interpreter at this point. So Perl is basically the interpreter name. So this is basically an interpreter, remember, right? If you want, this Perl is basically an interpreter name, and this is Perl is basically the file name. So remember, this Perl is just a Perl interpreter, and it will always be Perl. It has to be Perl. This is just a file name which I have named, and it is Perl. This name can change according to your choice. Remember that, right? So don't get confused. What is this Perl and this Perl? This Perl is an interpreter, and this is just a file name. So this Perl interpreter is going to scan this file and execute this file, right? I press enter and you look at this, the output is high as designed, right? So it is high. So this is what manually calling the interpreter. This is the process of manually calling the interpreter. However, it is always cumbersome and it's pretty irritating as well to always call the Perl interpreter manually. Now here comes the change, right? Now I'm going to build the Perl interpreter manually into the code. Let's see how I can put the Perl interpreter automatically into my code, right? So let's say so as I mentioned previously, this is the Perl interpreter. So this is basically where the location, the /user/bin/Perl is the location of the Perl interpreter, and any Perl program should be starting with this statement with the shebang notation followed by the path to the Perl program. This is basically showing, this will basically, so when you basically try to execute the Perl program, it would automatically call the Perl interpreter. So this statement is automatically calling the Perl interpreter, right? It's automatically calling it. So let's see what is the difference here, right? Now I'm just going to copy this into my Unix box, right? So this is basically to just empty the file so that I have the latest code. So there's nothing in there now. I'm just putting the full code in there again, right? Now if you remember, previously I called the Perl interpreter manually, but now in Unix, since I've defined it, let me open this file. If you look at it, I have manually already defined the Perl interpreter here, so I can just execute my file directly and I will get the output. Now you look at it, I haven't called the Perl interpreter. It was already in the code here, right? And that is why I didn't have to call the Perl interpreter manually. It was already in my code. The Perl immediately executed it and gave me a response of high. So this is one of the major uses of shebang notation, why you need to use it. So every Perl program, the best practice is basically to use this at the start of every program, showing the location of the Perl. Right, and this location may change depending on, sometimes people install it in different locations. So which is the command which basically tells you, so if I don't know the location, I would type this and I'm sorry, which Perl, so there it is, right? So you just have to specify the path, right? And this path is exactly on here, right? So that is the importance of shebang notation. Hope everyone understood that, right? So now we've already written a basic Perl program. Now let's look at how a print statement would behave. Since we've already done a print statement, let's just analyze how a print statement is working, right? So let's look at a greater print statement. Now here, the same way, print boolean high, print high, right? So by default, now let's just print the same thing again, which already we have it here, right? We already have this here. So if you observe this, if you look at it, I have printed this. The print statement high appears on the same line and there is no new line character generated. Perl by default does not generate a new line character, right? So always the best, so if you want a new line character to generate in Perl, you would just make a modification saying /n, right? Which is the new line character in Perl, so that it is much readable to you when the output is coming to you. If you look at this, this is not really readable, right? It's on the same line and you want high to be on one line and your next prompt and this prompt to be on the next line. So that's when a new line character is apt to use, is very good to use, right? So let me just modify my code. I've modified the code. So I'm just copying it into my file, right? So this is basically This command is basically just to empty the file, and I'm just copying my new code, modified code inside it. That's it. So there is my whole code. If you look at it, yeah, this is the complete code. I'm just saving it. I'm saving it with WQ command, and now I'm just running it. So if you look at it clearly, you must have understood the difference, right? Now a new line character is generated and my prompt comes on the next line, right? So here there was no new line generated, and the output was not pretty easy, or I mean, it's not pretty user friendly, right? Here it is clear, oh, I got this output from my Perl statement and my cursor is on the next line, which is what I wanted. And that is what /n does. It basically generates a new line character, right? So that is one of the concepts. Now, if you remember, now this is one very important aspect of Perl. Every statement in Perl must end with a semicolon, right? If you do not put a semicolon, it will generate a compile time error. So let me show you an example. What happens if you don't put a semicolon in Perl? Let's say it's simple. I would just remove the semicolon out of here. And let's try to execute and see what happens exactly here, right? Similarly, I'm just emptying the file and trying to put my new code in, right? We are Perl. I'm inserting my new code here. So if you look at it, I'm missing the semicolon here, right? So ideally, it should be generating an error at this point, right? So there it is. Perl aborted due to compilation errors, right? So let me change the code back again and just put a semicolon here, right? And now let's see what happens. So let me put my new code back in there. We are at Perl, insert, alright, and then you just run it now. Now there it is. Now it executes fine. Remember, without the semicolon in your statement, it generated a compilation error, whereas with a semicolon, it just executed fine. So the end result is every statement in Perl must end with a semicolon, right? So we've already discussed about the new line character in my previous example. Now coming to variables, right? So let me just put this as an important topic. So let me just say this, right? Variables. This is where your actual coding and actual things start. Actually, this was till now we have just discussed the basics, just getting into it. And here we have to get more involved in Perl, and this is where your actual concepts start, right? So let me put this in red, which is pretty important. Right, so yeah, there it is. Now let me fold it. Variables in Perl, right? Okay. So let's see, I'm sorry. Yeah. So coming to variables in Perl, what is exactly a variable? I mean, just always think in analytical terms, right? Don't just understand everything just for the just saying variable. What is a variable? Anything which changes, right, is called a variable. Now once you define a value, that value might change over a period of time. It may be a day, tomorrow, in a minute, in a second. So anything which does not constantly stay at the same value is called a variable, right? You can modify that value, is called a variable. Now what are the variable types in Perl? There are only three variable types in Perl, that is scalar variables, which we will be discussing today. You have something called as arrays, and you have something called as hashes, which we'll be discussing going forward, right? So remember, there are only three variables in Perl: scalars, arrays, associative arrays. Also the associative arrays are nothing but they are called hashes, right? So let's discuss what is a scalar variable. A scalar variable is a variable in Perl which can hold a single value. So remember, let me repeat my statement again. A scalar variable is a variable in Perl which can hold only a single value. It cannot hold more than one value. So let's take an example here, right? So, and also remember, variables in Perl are defined using the dollar symbol, right? So let me just show you an example. Here, this was just a normal print statement. Here, I'm basically going to show you how to define a variable. Dollar. Any variable in Perl, any scalar variable, remember, any scalar variable in Perl is defined using the dollar symbol. So here $x indicates a scalar variable and I am giving it a value. Remember, a scalar value can hold only one value. So I can only give one value here. Right? So the statement here indicates $x is a scalar variable which is holding the value 5. Right? So now remember, if I do a print, now I would like to explain one more concept here. If I would do a print of this $x, what would you expect to happen? If say I would do this, single quotes, which I'll be discussing. Okay, I'll come to this later. I don't want to confuse you at this point. So this is basically the definition of a scalar variable, right? So now let's look at assignment of variables. Now remember, I'll show you how to print the variables and all that going forward, but I just wanted to show you primarily how to define a scalar variable. Let's go step by step so that you get very good at Perl and you become expert in Perl programming. So that is the reason why I go step by step and very slowly, right? Assignment operations on variables. So let's put this as assignment operations on scalar variables. So what does assignment mean? Now, if I say $y is equal to $x, right? This means that the value of $x, the value, remember the assignment operations on a scalar variable here, indicating the assignment operation on a scalar variable. Here, this value indicates $y will contain the value of $x, right? And when you print the value of $y, you will contain 5. I will show you exactly when during the print statements, right? So that is basically an assignment operation. Now I'll show you one more type of assignment where it's assignment at a go, right? So let's say I want to define multiple variables at a time. $A, comma $B, comma $C. So is equal to 10, 20, 30. So remember, so I've showed you two types of assignments here. Here I'm assigning a value of variable $x into $y. But sometimes I would want to assign multiple variables at one single statement. Remember, I want to assign multiple values in single statement. I could certainly define $a is equal to 10, $b is equal to 20, $c is equal to 30 in separate statements. But I want all of these to be defined in one statement. That is when I would use such a statement. Right. Now first here in all these three statements you just have defined the value of x, y, a, b and c, but you don't know how it's exactly going to print. Now this is a very important topic, right? So I will be showing you that in a separate property coming below, right? Now at this point we have done three things. I've just defined a variable x, I've defined a variable y, which is basically an assignment operation. It will basically hold the value of x, which is 5 over here. And then I've defined three variables continuously just on one single statement to save time by defining $a will get 10, $b will get $a will get 10, $b will get 20 and $c will get 30, right? So till now we've learned only declaration of the variable, right? This is how variables are declared. Now, I would like to take one more point here. If you look at programming languages like Java, C, and C++, you declare data types. For example, integers, doubles, float, and all these you declare whenever you're declaring a variable. However, this is what I meant initially. Perl is very simple, right? You don't have to declare your variable as int, double, float. Perl interpreter is intelligent enough that based on the operation you're performing, it converts the variables that you have declared into the appropriate data type automatically, right? So let me repeat the statement, a very important statement, right? You do not have data types in Perl. When I mean you don't have data types in Perl, you're just declaring your variables. And based on the operation, let's say based on the operations you're performing, Perl interpreter interprets the operation and converts the variable into the appropriate data type. So let's say if you're performing an addition operation, it converts the variables into numeric types and performs the addition. So this is one of the simplest way and best way, right? So it's not complex, right? So that is why we say Perl is a loosely typed language, right? So that's coming here actually, right? So that is why we say Perl is a loosely typed language, whereas Java and C is a strongly typed language. So loosely typed in the sense you're not declaring your variables and everything, right? So Perl is intelligent enough to understand the variables, and based on the operation you're performing, it automatically converts it into the appropriate data type internally, right? Whereas in Java, which is a strongly typed language, you need to declare your variables, right? So that is that is why Perl is pretty simple and flexible, right? Now let's come to variable interpolation. Right? So this is a very important topic, right? Variable interpolation. What does variable interpolation mean? Now let me show you practically with this code. Right? If you look at here, we've just defined the variables, but nowhere have we printed the values, right? We've just defined the variables $x, $y, $a, $b, $c, but nowhere have we printed it. Now let's print and see what happens. I want to print the value of $x. Let's see what happens. So ideally, according to the statement, it should print 5. So do you think it's going to print 5? I don't think so. So let's see what happens. Okay, just emptying the file. Perl. Let's see what happens. Sorry, let me just show it this way, right? So if you put it in single quotes, right? So this is what I would wanted to explain, right? So basically, you cannot substitute the value of $x. If you look at it, if you're trying to print $x in a single quoted string, it directly prints $x, right? So naturally, you would never want to print the variable. You want to print its value, right? So in a single quoted string, this is the concept I wanted to explain. In a single quoted string, you can never substitute a variable. So here, it directly, you're putting a variable here, and ideally you wanted this value to be printed, but what has been printed here, $x has been printed, which is not what you want the output as. So What I would do, I will just put a double quotes. Now, if I put a double quotes here, you will see the output, right? So this is a double quotes. So let me copy my code again here. There it is. So now you can see the value is 5. So what does variable interpolation mean? So if you want to substitute the value of a variable, always ensure it is in double quoted values, right? It's in double quoted. A single quote will not produce the value of the variable. It will directly print the variable itself. So whenever you want to substitute the variable's name here $x, if you want to print the value 5, you need to enclose it in double quoted strings here. If you put it in a single quoted strings, it will not print the value and it will print the variable itself. So always remember, if you want the value of a variable $x in this case, you would have to put it in double quoted strings. So that is what variable interpolation means, how to get the value of a variable, right? So that's the topic, and let's go on to the next one. So I think we've covered this, basically highlighting the difference between single quoted and double quoted strings. So I'll just take another example over here with the $100, right? So let me just show you what that means, right? So let's say let me just modify this code. X is equal to say $100. Yeah, so if I say $x is equal to $100, and you actually want dollar money, right? So let's say I'll put this as variable as dollar money. Now you want this to be printed as $100. So you should know exactly where you're using. You need to use a single quoted string and where you need to use a double quoted string. So if I print dollar money here, see what happens. It will print, in this case it will not print. Let's see what it prints, right? I want $100 as the output, right? So let's see what it's going to print. Okay, here clearly we got the output as $100. Why we got the output as $100? Because we put it in a single quoted string here. That is why you got $100 correctly the value, though you put it in double quotes. Here. However, if I modify this, right? Let's say I modified it to double quotes, then you would not be getting $100. Let's see what you get. So what you get when you put double quotes here, you will not certainly be getting $100. Let's see what is the value you're going to get, right? You see that you don't get any value, because when you put it in double quotes, see you got only high here in the right. So that means you never got the value of $100. You were supposed to get $100, you did not get that. Now if I immediately change it back this again to single quotes, you will get the value, right? So let's see. So you understand this concept pretty well, right? So I'm putting it to single quotes. There you have $100 again. So there it is. So what this means is, when you're using $100 in double quotes, it expects a substitution of that, and since we don't have $100 variable defined, it just does not produce any output. However, when I placed $100 in a single quoted string, right? So it's not taken as a a variable or something, right? It's not taken as a variable. So ultimately, it clearly substitutes the exact value $100 when I try to print it. So understand the difference here. So when you want to print anything with the $100, you need to put it in single quoted strings so that it doesn't take it as a variable and Perl expects it to be defined. Hope you understood that. Remember that. Yeah. So let's see what are the topic cells. Yep, I think that should cover for us day 2 of Perl, right? So hope everyone understood day 2 of Perl. Just go through the notes and go through the training again, and we can have some questionnaires. So if you have any questions tomorrow, we certainly can handle it. And thanks everyone for attending day 2 of Perl training. So tomorrow we'll go more in depth onto variables and understand how they exactly work. So today what we understood was basically printing the Perl program, understanding the basics of Perl, doing the print statement, and basically understanding what is a scalar variable. And the most important thing you talked about here is variable interpolation. And there is a huge difference between a single quoted and double quoted strings when you're defining variables and trying to print out. So always understand the difference between a single quoted string and a double quoted string, right? Thanks everyone and have a good day. We'll catch you tomorrow on day 3. Have a good day. Bye.